Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm back. I'm sorry about the tech issues before. This is Growth RX, and today I am joined with Jason Smith. Hey, Jason, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So today, obviously, I'm scattered now because we had a few tech issues before. Hopefully everything's going okay. We're streaming back in the group, and I've sorted out those prior issues. So thank you, everybody, for persevering with us. That's the joys of going live. So in an effort to introduce Jason a little bit more, now Jason is the founder of Back in Motion, which we're going to deep dive into a little bit more about his journey, his leadership experience, a little bit of the background about how he got to where he is and where he's headed. But before we go into that, there's a few questions I'd like to ask just to make some preliminary introductions. And before we cut out previously, we were asking Jason about the book that he's reading at the moment. Now, none of us heard that, so if you don't mind repeating it, I heard it, but just for the sake of everybody else, what book are you reading at the moment?
So I'm just about to finish for the 5th time a book called A Purpose-Driven Life, and it's written by Rick Warren. It's a 40-day reflection book. You read just a short chapter every day. And I think it was probably about 15 years ago he wrote it, and it made the New York Times bestseller for many consecutive years. It's one I keep going back to. So it just seems to be the right time now to put that in me again.
Great. And obviously we are all in lockdown in Victoria. We're going through a tough time here. All businesses collectively, nobody is exempt of this economic disruption. But I think with some optimism, we can get excited about what we're going to do and where we're going to go when all this is over, hopefully. I want to know what is going to be the first restaurant you're going to head back to.
Well, if it's just my wife and I, not the 4 kids coming with us, we have a favourite little restaurant. It's called the Black Toro, and it's a fusion. Yeah, it's a fusion between Spanish tapas and modern Mexican. It's got some really unusual flavours. Great little spot near where we live, and so that's one of our favourites.
Amazing. And this is one of my favorite questions, in regards to your childhood, when you think about superheroes or toys or fond memories, what is something that you look back on fondly as a child?
Wow. You know what? I was mad for space Lego. Absolutely fanatical, to the point where every birthday, every Christmas, for at least 10 years, it was space Lego. And I kept the boxes, I kept the instructions, I do the creative play, but mostly I just exhibit this stuff on my bedroom shelving. And I regret it, because at some point in my later teens, when it was time to buy a car, I packaged it all up, sold it. And of course, now I'm buying it all again for my kids. So I should have kept it.
I think I'm a little bit the same way with Cabbage Patch Kids and anything miniature. There's a fashion for many things at the moment, and that was me as a kid. So I love that that's coming back. And my important question that I ask personally for myself: are Crocs an acceptable form of footwear in your eyes?
What's the footwear?
Crocs.
Crocs. Probably not in the Northern Territory, Jade.
Yeah.
Anywhere else, you will probably be looked at sideways. But yeah, no, we're not a Crocs family. Okay. But we're a Havaianas family. My wife is from Brazil, and so we have to support the national brand.
Okay, awesome. Now, in true leadership style, we do love to showcase people doing wonderful things to impact, grow, and lead in the profession. So what does leadership mean to you?
Well, that's a simple question, but it does not have a simple answer. In fact, I take 8 days and 28 modules in the Iceberg Leadership Institute to try and answer that question. If I was to give you a 1-sentence cheeky little response, it would be that you can walk into a room and the majority of people plan on turning left, and you enable them to see the virtue in going right. That would be my pragmatic definition of the attribute of leadership, to have influence, really. But of course, it's much more complex than that.
And I love that, because the extension of that, and obviously with my passion for leadership, I love, and it's a little bit self-serving, I love hearing how other people describe it, but the influence that you talk about and how you influence is obviously another stepping stone, whether that be through persuasion, leading by example, observation, all those sorts of things. And we'll kind of head into that a little bit. But on a segue from that question, which does really interest me as well, is the belief that leaders are born and made. I personally, and I don't really deliver my personal opinion on this until I hear a response. So I'm going to tell you what I think afterwards, but I'd love to hear what you think about leaders being born and made.
It's such a classic debate. And of course, all of these dilemma questions are designed around entrapment. There's no right answer, because there's evidence for both sides. And in fact, I love actually facilitating a debate around this very topic. But I won't sit on the fence. If you had to compel me one over the other, it would be that absolutely leaders are made, that you are not a born leader, even though you have attributes and various predispositions and personality types and experiences that shape you in your early life. I would say the fantastic news about leadership, and we need to hear this in healthcare, because so often we are not endowed with confidence around leadership, because we're book smart in so many other ways. But we need to hear that you can learn leadership, that the greatest leaders have probably invested themselves into it, which means they're more made than born. You don't luck into leadership. You do the hard work, and the benefit, the fruit of that, is that you have influence in the world around you. So I'm that side of the bias.
Okay. And look, I totally agree with you. I mean, you can't put together a leadership course or have completed one like yours if you don't believe that you can teach, and also have a duty of care to teach more great leaders. And that is part of my passion, to inspire more leaders in allied health. And I know that you're really similar. And I think that's globally, no matter what industry you're in. I think we all have a duty of care to lead, even if it's not just ourselves, to do better and be better across all facets of our life. But I do love, and part of the research that I did in my study last year was I had to analyze for a project 150 of the greatest global CEOs and leaders in the world. And it was absolutely fascinating. First and foremost, there were only 10 women on the list that we were given out of 150, but that's a whole different topic in itself.
Yeah, they've got the wrong list, Jade.
And look, I am certainly not a feminist. I believe that even females need, and males both equally need, to earn their place, no matter what it is that they're doing. And that's through leading by example. But every single one of these leaders, and Elon Musk is a great example of that. He sold and created his first business when he was 8. Now, there's a big difference between leaders and entrepreneurs. And often people confuse entrepreneurship with leadership. So I'd like to start off extending on that a little bit, because I want you to talk a bit more about your journey, which is a great journey. And it started off, I think, in the, which I'll let you tell it, but in the back garage of your home. But I want to know a little bit more about your childhood, and possibly getting some confirmation bias on where I stand with this. Did you show leadership qualities from a really, really young age? Were you destined for greatness, to do something big? Did you always have a drive to achieve and a determination not to fail?
Well, we're all destined for greatness. Our greatness comes in lots of different shapes and sizes. And I think actually retrospectively, because hindsight's this wonderful thing, when I look back, I had a load of entrepreneurial tendencies, and certainly had a number of people invest into me some leadership attributes. And I agree with this premise that they're not the same thing. They're actually distinctly different. But I have these very humorous stories of, as an 8-year-old boy, also having to, as my weekend chores, cut down the big pine tree, or at least sweep up the leaves that Dad made as a mess from cutting down this pine tree. And it's the month of October. And somehow I turned it into a little business opportunity, because I ended up selling the branches door to door on our household block as early Christmas trees, and made a couple of gold coins, or back then dollar notes, for my efforts. And that spawned a little gardening business, and I employed my next door neighbour at the age of 10, walking a lawnmower around the block and mowing people's lawns, and started a little confectionery shop in the school playground in lunch times before the school shut me down. You know, there's all of these evidences of tendencies. But you know what? I never considered myself at all inclined towards business. I grew up, both sides of my family had either been tradespeople, blue collar, or they had been in the armed forces. And so, you know, I didn't have anyone in my family even go to university, let alone the world of commerce. And so I actually grew up thinking business was the dark side, the kind of, I shunned it, had no interest in it whatsoever, but undoubtedly these tendencies were there. And so, you know, you can't deny a little bit of your experience in those nurturing years, for sure.
And so obviously you went through all that, and I resonate with that a lot. And I think often entrepreneurs don't have to be good at business. They just have to have great ideas and an energy and a motivation to back themselves. And then if they're good enough, they can often pay other people to get a lot of it done for them. It's about emotional intelligence, which I'm sure that you would agree. But the next step from that, so then you went on to physiotherapy, and obviously there's a long list of things that you've done since then. You've led a team, you've written books, you've been a global speaker. You started off as a physiotherapist, and obviously you went from physio, private practice, to wanting to scale. How does that happen, and what goes through your head? Why did you have this idea that many others didn't? And also, how did you execute it? Because not many others have been able to. In actual fact, how many franchises could you suggest there are in allied health at the moment?
Oh, there'd probably be a couple now. I mean, if you think about it, there's almost no sector of commercial life, let alone including healthcare, that hasn't been touched by a nuance of franchising. People would be shocked. Their TV shows are franchised, their sporting teams are franchised, their restaurants, of course, and retail outlets are franchised, and healthcare has engaged in franchising as a concept for decades. But they haven't necessarily done it well, and they haven't necessarily done it strictly in allied health, but certainly somebody had to do it first, and that's been a real roller coaster in lots of ways. But to go back to your question, I don't think I started as a physio. That's the point. I started in my primary school years actually wanting to be a medical missionary. That was what caught my attention. I saw those World Vision ads as a little fella, watching the Cartoon Connection on a Saturday morning, those impoverished kids with distended bellies and flies buzzing around them, collapsing in the dirt. And, you know, I had mum and dad were asleep at the time. I had no one to debrief with. And so I was drawing my own conclusions as a little fella, and made a decision that I wanted to do something about that was unfair. That's unjust. I didn't know that Africa wasn't just down the road and around the corner, and smarter people than me have been trying to solve this for decades. But in my heart, I really captured this idea of wanting to be somebody of impact, but in the developing world. And I fell into physiotherapy as one of the vehicles through which maybe I could have that influence. I didn't particularly aspire to private practice. In fact, it's humorous now, but I married my first girlfriend on the day after, or shortly after we graduated. She was a nurse, I was a physio, and I promised her I have no intention of business. We were both committed to working cross-culturally. So that's kind of where we started our journey. But as you say, at some point we had this intersection in our life where we had to decide whether we were going to run a business or not. And I describe to a lot of people, I am the most reluctant business operator in the sector, because I only did it out of necessity. We had to fund some of the initiatives that we wanted to do overseas, and what better than, rather than relying on donations, but to build your own economic engine. So the first seed of our entrepreneurism was driven by really wanting to get across and work in parts of Southeast Asia. But at some point, we had to make a firm commitment to be excellent at business and to really invest into our systems and people. And scale is just a natural consequence of being good at what you do. I say to a lot of people, healthy things grow. If you're not growing, there's something that isn't healthy about your culture, your product, your service, your people. And so we actually were really just at one point there early, unwilling participants in our own growth story. But we had to catch up real quick and learn the business of healthcare.
And so, you know, obviously you did start out in private practice, though. You did open your own clinic first.
Yeah. Well, eventually I started in public healthcare, taught at the university for a little while, and I didn't cross to the dark side until my third year post-graduation.
And so if business perhaps wasn't your driving force, the scale came through leadership and being smart enough to delegate the work and personable enough to build trust and intuitive enough to predict an outcome, all those sorts of things combined. Was it leadership that you attest a little bit to your success?
It's a lot of things. If you think of leadership as the foundation or the rocket fuel, I think that's probably a reasonable explanation, but it's so many things. And so if you ask me about entrepreneurism, I don't think entrepreneurism is just having the good ideas, because there are a lot of people who go to their grave with huge ideas, but they never do anything with them. I think of entrepreneurism as being the 3 C's. It's the creativity. So there's your ideas. I then think it's the conviction, which is that real determination. It's a calling. It's something in your heart, not just your head. It's something you are compelled to do. It's part of your purpose. And then the third C is the courage. It's the courage to actually keep going when it fails. And, I've tripped over more than I've got it right. I've made a career out of getting stuff wrong. And only by persistence do we kind of eventually get things right. And so entrepreneurism for me is certainly part of that story. And you've alluded to it. I think it's the great people that get sort of drawn to you. And you could call that leadership, but that's their gift to our story. So a lot of good people who are not just like-minded, but like-hearted, they believed in what we called optimal health. They believed that physiotherapy and allied health generally isn't a break-fix consultancy. It's not about just patching injured people back and sending them off to get sore again. They really understood this idea that we are prepping people for optimal life. And so as those people gravitated to our mission, it was their gift to us, actually, that they brought their talent, their expression of courage and creativity. And I guess my job really is just to be the great facilitator of that and to keep the bell curve moving forwards. And, if that's the critical contribution I made, then yeah, I'd say that's probably best summarized as a leadership attribute.
And that's the beauty of combining collaboration and synergy. I mean, I could imagine that every time you brought on another director, another practice owner, franchise owner, and director, they brought with them their own wealth of knowledge, their own way of doing things, and their own leadership. And when you've got people invested in a vision, growth can happen pretty quickly. And that's what everybody wants in business, isn't it? But when you've got one person constantly delegating to many, your growth is stunted. But when you've got many people invested, then it happens over time. And I think the notion of culture in such a big organization, did you find along the way, and I'd love to talk to you more if you'll extend on some of, I guess, the failures and some of the things that you would never ever do again. But I can imagine it, and maybe exhausting is the wrong word, but you're constantly investing in culture. I've got a small team of around 40, and you've got much bigger teams, and you've got people that that facilitate their own little clinics. But overall, culture is something we invest in constantly. all the time. And somebody gave me a compliment once that our culture was like a cult. And I'm like, well, a cult is actually the first part of culture. I actually took it as a compliment. But
Absolutely.
how, along the way, is that one of the things that you would find is the most difficult, is holding up a healthy culture, not only amongst your directors, but then within their individual practices as well?
Yeah. And you're right. The derivative of the word culture comes from this root that we get sometimes a derogatory reference to cult, but cults are all consuming. They capture your heart and soul. And people are prepared to make enormous sacrifices and huge, extraordinary commitments to cults. The question is, as a cult leader, Jade, are you leading with noble cause or are you leading people astray? Because leadership is amoral. Leadership is an ability to influence and impact. It doesn't actually qualify whether you're leading for good or leading for bad. And so culture, yeah, this is big. In physiotherapy, we have a culture. In osteopathy, there would be a culture. We obviously come from families of origin that have a culture. And then the business teams that we create have a culture. Even within your practice, you have a culture amongst the clinicians that is distinct from the culture amongst your front of house support staff. There are so many layers. It's like a Sara Lee cake. And, if you're talking about failures, I think one of my real low points, and it's 20 years now, 20 years we've been running the Back in Motion Health Group, and we have about 120 locations across Australia and New Zealand, which represents more than 600 people. And I reckon halfway through that journey, one of my real awakenings was when I felt like I had talked enough about vision and values and strategy, and I stopped talking about the DNA of our group because I felt like everyone had heard it. And here goes Jace again on his soapbox. And every conference I hosted and every podcast I ran and every email I sent, it was kind of like I got fatigued at my own rhetoric. And I actually thought, the job's done. I'm good. Culture is right where we want it. People are aligned. Their hearts are in this. And I got distracted. And I started investing my time into commercial opportunities and growth and strategy and new clinical equipment and launching new businesses and all sorts of other fun and sexy stuff. And I came back, figuratively speaking, like I had this awakening about 18 months later when I was running a new staff induction. And I had a whole bunch of people who were telling me what they thought our vision, values, and mission were. And I was devastated at how warped and distorted their impression was because I had stopped talking about it. And so now, in the absence of my voice, people were filling the gaps with their own impressions, which, of course, that means there's 600 versions of the truth. And it was a big lesson. And I had to get back on that campaign, if you like, of aligning people to our roots and reminding them of why we do what we do. Because here's the truth. You get the culture you set, or you get the culture you deserve by abandoning the message. Either way, right? Culture is what it is. It's the unwritten ground rules. It's the behaviors and beliefs that people carry. And if we don't fill the blank space, they will, but they won't necessarily fill it with what you want. And so culture is massive. It is the great enabler of growth. It's also going to be the biggest impediment if you can't keep people together. And growth is the enemy of culture because you have more people and greater geography. Even any of the listeners who have a single practice and they're a sole practitioner and you add one more clinician to the team, you have just doubled your chances of culture splintering. From a client perspective, a patient perspective, imagine when you start your second location, let alone you start your second state or country. And the risks of culture falling down are massive. And so the job's never done is my learning.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think it's because we're dealing with personalities. And every time you bring in a different personality, you bring in different biases,
Yep.
different opinions, and a different overall assumption of the way it should be. And if you stop being the voice, people will interpret silence however they like.
Yeah.
And so, one of the questions I have for you from watching from the outside, and there's a lot of allied health clinic owners in this group who know nothing about Back in Motion. And you've probably heard all these questions before and you hear all this stuff about franchise and all the rest of it. To be honest, nobody really knows what goes on within a cult, within a culture, unless those, other than those who are invested in it.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little elevator pitch on the benefits of running a franchise model? Because a lot of people work with their own bias. If they don't know anything about it, they'll kind of go, well, I don't need that. Tell us, I mean, I could predict that it is about the family, it is about the culture, and it is about having a massive opportunity of people to be supportive and to support you. What are your main benefits to running franchise?
You know what? I speak at a lot of events, and a lot of them are in healthcare, and I get heckled by so many people with this thought that franchising is not going to work in allied health. And I have 120 evidences to say that I think they're wrong. And it's not because it's easy. It's not because we always get it right. And it's not because we're trouble-free. But franchising is a horrible word. It's the dirty F word, because people think they know what we mean when the ACCC Consumer Code calls it a franchise. They think of McDonald's, or they think of something else kind of in their retail experience. Franchising is otherwise best described as being in business for yourself, but not by yourself. And there's 1,000 ways you can skin the cat. So we don't have very many practices that are exactly the same in terms of their ownership structure, the legal and financial elements that we put around it. We have got such a creative, accessible model. And it really got birthed actually by accident. Most of my successes, I'm an accidental success. I have failed my way into success. It started very unexpectedly when we had a whole bunch of senior clinicians working in my first practice who wanted to become partners. And the problem with partnership, at least 20 years ago, was that the culture of the industry was you had to work 10 years hard labor to pay 4 times the price for a very small piece of a practice. And it just became really unattractive. And anyway, making someone a partner doesn't increase the size of the pie. It just divides the shares of the spoils. And so I said to a couple of these senior clinicians, I'll do you one better than partnership. I'll help you start your own practice. And very quickly, after half a dozen of those experiences, we realized we've got repeatable systems. We've got some economies of scale. We've actually got a whole lot more value working together, even if we have sovereign ownership of our own practices, than we do competing with each other. And lots of our peak bodies and industry forums back then don't exist like they do now. And so we actually decided we're stronger together. And so that was the birth of the Back in Motion Health Group. And of course, now it affords us superior technology, better marketing. We have 25 experts in our support team in all the areas of finance and HR and legal. And it just takes the pain out of physios doing what they really didn't train for, which is behind the curtain business operations, and allows them to do what they love, which is treating their patients and leading their staff. So it's an enabler.
Absolutely. And sometimes there's no point reinventing the wheel. If somebody is doing it well, there used to be this career pathway within allied health on a contractor model or an employment model. You go from 50 to 55 to 60, then you reach the ceiling, and then you just have to go out down the road, open up your own clinic. Patients follow you. You have that fight about who they are. We all know, we all turn a blind eye. We all think it's not worth fighting for. At the end of the day, synergy and collaboration, networking, you can buy things in bulk. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
But also, if it was that easy, there'd be a lot more people doing it. And there's not.
So I don't think it's easy. I think it's simple.
And that's what I'm saying to you. My
Yeah.
point is, from a perspective of having a large business myself and knowing what scale looks like, I sit here celebrity struck a little bit, you know, admiring your achievements because you know, regardless of how you look at it, to take something that started off as a clinic and turn it into a 110, 120 is a huge achievement. And for just from myself personally, I think it's certainly worth congratulating. And I know that you've got to a point where you value your success and you share the wins with your team. Is there anything that you would not do again?
Oh, you're very gracious with your compliments because you would know as well as all of your listeners that nobody gets any level of quote unquote success, and we all define that differently, without really chewing dirt most of the way and skinning your knees and regretting a lot of your decisions. And so I think if the question behind the question is what are some of the pitfalls and stuff that you could help avoid other people making, yeah, there's definitely a lot of those. My greatest wins are my people, and my greatest losses are my people. So, you know, there's a lot of instances where I think I could have and should have dealt with the people challenges inside our business, particularly in the first decade, so much more constructively, graciously, even commercially. So, you know, I can remember having such a high standard. I mean, I have a high standard on myself. You do of yourself. It's true of a lot of high achievers. Most people in allied healthcare are high achievers, and they would have very high expectations of the people around them. And the hard part is a lot of people don't reach them. And the question then is, how do you deal with that? And so I think I was unnecessarily demanding on my early teams, and a lot of them are still with me, and they would concur. They would say I've softened a lot. I've learned the art of letting people run their own races inside the strategy. So certainly that would be something I'd do differently. I think I also, frankly, was really I was anti-business, which didn't help me. I mean, it sounds ridiculous as I sit here 20 years on, but I actually rejected so much of commercial common sense because I just didn't want to be part of that channel. And as a result, I blew a lot of money. I bought so many businesses or bought in services into our group that frankly either didn't work, or, you know, I paid for more bad will than goodwill, and it cost me lots of money. And, you know, I think if I just had listened to more advice, and if I had not, you know, if I'd got over myself a little more quickly and just accepted that there is commercial common sense and pragmatic due diligence to a lot of decision making, I think I would have gone a lot further, a lot quicker. And I think the other third big thing, if I was kind of looking for the highlights here, I was way too worried about what people thought. You know, industry criticism is rampant, particularly in Australia. I mean, even in COVID times, because, you know, we're talking about something that we're by far from over yet. But you would see the polls and the public opinion worm oscillate up and down in social media as people would either support or criticize the views of others and how they're trying to navigate this strange season. And in my early years, I reckon I was way too influenced by what people thought. And I should have just stayed on my trail. I knew what I wanted to achieve, and, you know, just let the naysayers have their time in the sun and get on with it. And, you know, in my second decade, that has certainly been my MO, but it took me 10 years to learn how to do that. So I'd be encouraging people, live out your convictions. You don't have to get it right all the time, but you'll want to show that courage, and even more so in the face of opposition.
And it's so true. You know, if you do as a leader, if you step up and show up, others will too. And leading by example, motivating other people, but also sharing that empathy and compassion for what people are going through at the moment, particularly in Victoria. I said people just want their dissonance to end. You know, they want to be open for business reasons, and then they want to be closed because they want to be contributing to a cause that is far bigger than themselves. nobody's winning here except this virus. And I think the only thing that we can do, and the great thing that we are doing, is coming together as a community. And the thing that I love the most, that I never thought I would see be the case, is sitting here talking to a physio, talking to a business owner like yourself from a totally different industry, connecting with physiotherapists, having private chat with chiropractors and EPs. And we are all coming together. And I'm thrilled to have a platform where we can all speak openly about how we're feeling, how our teams are feeling. Because, I mean, whilst vulnerability is very much in fashion at the moment, there's a reason for that. People want to be able to show emotion, feel emotion, have it heard, have it seen, and have it recognized, because ultimately we all want to matter. And I think that's a great segue into what we were going to talk about today. Is one of the things we chatted about offline that I found really interesting was your 10 principles in a team, creating a team revolution. Now, firstly, that in itself just sounds bold. But you break it down into 10 parts, and that's from your book, because just to add that to the list, you're an author as well. How many books have you written now?
I've written 2 full books, and I've contributed to a couple.
Okay. And so in that, and obviously we've covered a few of those top 10 things. Creating a champion team, number 1, over leading and under managing. We sort of went over that a little bit, the cultural commitment side of it. One of the other things that you talk about is distributing authority. Now, this is where I want to learn from you. I'm a self-confessed control freak in the best possible way. It curbs my anxiety, and it makes me get things done and execute goals to achieve results. But often, and what I found part of my journey, and part of the reason why I didn't scale so early on, is because I was reluctant to give up that authority. And now I've learned the hard way, and I am the queen of delegation. I appear everywhere and am nowhere. That is the key. But, when you talk about that distribution of authority, it's about who you're distributing it to. But can you extend on what you mean by that?
Yeah. So thanks for introducing the book, because that was a really long introduction, 40 minutes into the conversation, and we're now sort of just turning our attention to these 10. And of course, we won't do them justice in the little time we have, but it's really important you do understand that this idea of a team revolution is language that I totally believe in. I'm not interested in just tweaking and just adjusting subtle nuances of life inside our practices, because in the most part, that's kind of just rearranging the deck chairs on a sinking Titanic. If you want to step change the performance of your team, you need a revolution, and you're the one to incite it. You're the leader. So you and me, that's our job description. So when we talk about distributed authority, you could Google that phrase, and I don't think you'll find anything of any substance out there, because that's my terminology. You'll read about delegation, you'll read about empowerment, but I specifically use this term of distributing authority, because we are all control freaks. It's our houses on the line. If you're a practice owner, it's your name, it's your reputation, it probably is your hard-earned money. And you've got the goodwill with the clients. And so who would ever in their right mind share decision-making with people who have only been there 5 minutes? The problem is, if you don't, you will fundamentally limit the contribution they can make to your business, to your practice. And you will put significant restrictions around not only your return financially, but more importantly, your lifestyle returns as an owner, because you will always be tethered to the decisions inside your practice. Now, I've got so many examples for this, but where this kind of emerged from in my experience is I kind of woke up at my desk at about 2:00 in the morning one working day, and realized I was fatigued from making 150 decisions that day, and the day before that, and of course consecutively for the 12 years that preceded it, and realized this is ridiculous. A, I'm not the smartest guy in the team anyway, so why am I making the decisions? B, how can you make that many and get them all right anyway? And 3, what the heck are the rest of my team being paid to do? And so I started on this journey of realizing it's not just delegation that I have to learn. It's the art of actually distributing the authority to the point where my job description is to make as few decisions as possible. There'll always be a couple reserved for me, but not many. And literally not many. Like, I should be able to count them on one hand. And everyone else in my team should be given the CEO role of what they're best at, what they love and what they're good at. They should be given the authority to make the decision. The worst part about this is when you practice this, when you give it a go, people are going to get it wrong. People are going to make mistakes. It's going to cost you money. And you're going to want to reef back on the reins and say, hang on a minute, I should make the decisions. Except that you forget, you get it wrong too, and you cost yourself money. And all you're doing is locking yourself back into that prison without bars. So I reckon this is a revolutionary strategy, not without its perils. I would caution people to apply it incrementally and with very careful thought. So I'm not saying just throw it all at the wall and hope it sticks. But by golly, if you get this embedded into your team, it will revolutionize your opportunities.
I couldn't agree more. One of the best pieces of advice I was ever given. I had the luxury of sitting at a ball about 10 years ago when I was just becoming a little thriving businesswoman. And I was sitting next to the CEO of Monash Hospital. And he told me that he was leading a team of about 1,400 health professionals in one day. And I was just in awe. So, of course, I had a couple of champagnes and extended my conversation with him. And I said to him, what is the key? What is the key to leading a large organization and a great team? And he said to me, and I'll never forget, create chains of accountability and lines of accountability that don't include you, which is a great step into your next comment in your 10 principles, is peer accountability. And accountability is huge. If somebody can leave it to somebody else to do, they will do it. We've got this mum concept at work. It's like our admin team. Mum, they'll ask the admin before they'll go and do it themselves. And that's not to say that I don't love you, my team who are watching, but it's true. Sometimes it's just easier to not think about it or to action it and delegate it, the decision making, to somebody else. So how do you encourage accountability? And is that through KPIs? Is that through, how do you actually performance manage people for accountability?
So if you thought distributing authority was going a bit too far, practice owners, let me tell you, expecting peer accountability is going to blow your mind. Like this is one of the 10, because it's going to be a stick of dynamite for this revolution you're trying to incite. So you can bring top-down accountability relatively simply. Yep, you can have KPIs and you can have performance reviews and you can just walk around with a big stick or a big carrot, and you can drive a behavior set. And we do that in our homes with our kids, and we do that in our schools with our teachers, and we do that in our practices with our practice owners and staff. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about peer accountability. This is where the best of me brings out the best in you, colleague to colleague, 24/7, as we rub shoulders and do life inside our practice, inside our team. It's a commitment that says, I'm going to call you out when you veer off the agreed values and the behaviors that we've already talked about, because that was part of our culture commitment. I'm going to tap you on the shoulder, and I'm going to show 2 pounds of love for every pound of discipline. So I'm going to celebrate when you get it right more than I'm going to kick you when you get it wrong. But we're not going to avoid the awkward conversations. Why? Because I love you and I love our team and I care deeply about our mission. And when I overhear you on the phone to one of my patients and you didn't treat them well, I care about their experience. And when I listen to you explain what happens with those recurrent ankle strains and I don't think you're on the mark, I care about the advice that you're giving, and we're gonna hold each other account. Now, the thing about this is, for it to work, you have to be totally expectant and welcoming of two-way traffic. Like you've got to be prepared to be held to account. So it doesn't matter if I own the practice, or in my case, I'm the group director of Back in Motion. I welcome people to call me out, to hold me to account. This is their responsibility as peers. You don't need a KPI around that. You need a safety in the environment for that to happen. And this is the holy grail, right? If you can get to a point where your team hold each other accountable, you don't have to be there anymore. You've made yourself redundant. And then you can invest into them rather than have to make all the decisions and fix all the problems and beat everyone up for not doing what they all said they were going to do. It makes you better than you really are as a leader, because you've effectively empowered that leadership acumen into your team.
And I think it's that even with roles and responsibilities and delegating out some of that accountability, people will rise to the occasion. If you give them a title, sometimes or a uniform, they'll wear it with pride. And so I couldn't agree with you more. That's where the collaboration comes through. And in the remaining steps in that top 10, we've got the collaboration I just mentioned, free speech, best contribution, transparency, safety, equity, and fairness. So it's where you then go through all of your accountability and, delegation and authority. And then you kind of open it up to, well, by doing all of this sort of stuff, it's kind of that recognition and reward. You're actually validating the role that they have and the value that they bring, the contributions that they bring. This is why even in our team, when we look way beyond KPIs. People talk about KPIs. I've got KPCs, the contributing factors, the core values, the character, consistency, communication, commitment. They're things that you can't track. They're the subjective KPCs overriding the objective KPIs. And you have to balance that out. And we call it a value score. But, I think then when you actually get positioned like that and you prove yourself and what you bring, then it's all deserving, and it takes into the next steps. Free speech, transparency, and safety. Could you extend on those a little bit?
Yeah, I think the last thing I want people within the Back in Motion Health Group, and so I want this for all of you as well, is that for people to come to work to serve you, to kind of second guess what they think you want them to do and then try and do what they've assumed you wanted. I mean, that's just a recipe for disaster. And it means we don't have free thinking, free speaking agents. We just have these fear-driven cultures inside our workplaces. And we've got to break that and start this revolution that says, you know what? I don't want you to serve me. I'm not the boss. Let's put the mission of our practice as the boss. Let's replace the man with the mission. I don't work for Jason anymore. I work for this incredible ideal of wanting to empower our patients in optimal lifelong health. Now, what do you think about that? What do you think about what we're doing and how we're doing it? Where can we improve? Where are we falling over? And encourage what might be dangerous conversation, but in really safe context. And let people say what they're thinking. Because here's another truism. Whether they say it or not, you and I have to concede our people are thinking lots of resistant thoughts. They're thinking, Jace has gone wrong on this idea. And so I'd rather them actually verbalize it. Then I can understand it more. We can learn from it. We can explore it. Maybe they'll influence me to their way of thinking, or maybe they'll better understand my rationale. But either way, we align and move forward. And so I am totally advocating free speech. I do this at home. So we've got 4 kids. This is a principle that just transfers everywhere in life. Speak respectfully, choose your timing, and be well considered in your opinion, but don't not share it, because if you think it, you're actually going to believe it, and that will influence how you behave, and the behavior becomes then unruly, something I can't control. So let's talk about it. And some people need more encouragement than others in that. There's a few people who you need to, balance the scales on in your teams. But I think it's a great attribute of a high-performing, self-led, values-driven team that free speech is welcome.
Absolutely. And I think obviously with professional maturity and emotional intelligence, delivery and execution of what you're saying is really important. And that's where, your virtues are really important. You don't want to hurt people's feelings. You want to acknowledge people's emotions and all those sorts of things. But I think unless you suggest that it is open and you are open to that feedback, the likelihood is people may feel intimidated to be able to contribute. They may feel reluctant, resistant, all of those sorts of things. So it's just a blanket statement that you just say if you want to share. It's more than an open door policy, right? Is there a time and a place still to speak?
No, the problem is if you just put in your, the headline kind of sentiments that, guys, call me if you have any questions. I'm always open to your feedback. Yep, my door's always open. You'll find that the only people who exercise the invitation are the people who probably would have anyway. And so if you want to really influence this as a norm within your team, you are going to have to lead that little horse to water. You are going to have to cup your hands and put bring their mouth right to the spot. You're going to have to really work hard. You're going to actually have to demonstrate safety for people, for them, before they will feel safe. This is the idea of trust, right? You have to act in a trustworthy manner before anyone's actually going to trust in you. And so I find myself having to give great, like celebrate exemplars of free speech to encourage more of it. Actually say to people, little Johnny caught me in the corridor the other day and he had some really hard news for me to hear, but it actually kept me bothered all evening because you know what? I think he was right. The way I spoke to you that day or the decision I made, I'm now regretting it. Or he's given me a whole new perspective, something I would never have seen if he hadn't have spoken to me. And so little Johnny, I'm so grateful. Like we are better because you took that risk. And by the way, guys, we need to take more risks. You need to speak up more often. And you that needs to be part of the language of team for people to actually believe you when you say you really do want it. Because a lot of people use the rhetoric, I'm open to feedback. And then some poor soul gives some feedback and then they get slammed for giving it. So we've got to live this stuff.
And doing some professional development and activities where it is open and everybody is there encouraging, contributing, and creating a safe space, then you are probably more likely to get some of the more introverted, reluctant team members to actually come out and shine through a little bit. Some of the greatest leaders we see around the world are really introverted people who, given the right platform and opportunity, can lead beautifully. Just because they're not the most outgoing, loud person in the room doesn't mean that they can't create a wonderful impact. And I think they're the ones that this is really encouraging for, and having that notion that it is there and it is part of the core values and culture of an organization that makes it really, really important. And we certainly do that. And it's nice to hear. So, and with that, I guess, does bring the equity and the fairness and the transparency of conversation and the safety, which beautifully rolls up those last three of the 10 principles. And I know now, having this conversation with you, there are so many little golden nuggets in here. And all I can hope is that people do tune in after and watch some of this and then come back and revisit it, because being a business owner is hard and you do need courage. And it is emotionally, physically, and mentally exhausting a lot of the time to be responsible all the time. Responsibility and having that responsibility, if it's not shared, is hard. But one of the things I love about this is hearing and having some team members and staff members watch this, firstly see the transparency in you talking and clearly suggesting that this was not an easy road. It's still not an easy journey and you're still not quite there yet, but you're sharing the load. with a lot of other people. And I do think that there are some young leaders out there in an organization. Just because you don't have a title doesn't mean that you can't lead, doesn't mean that you can't step up and start contributing and hold your peers accountable, exactly as you said. So there are so many take home messages from this. Where do we find more about you if people want to hear more? I mean, can you mention the names of your 2 books in case people want to read them?
Yeah, well, the book that we're talking about today, Outside In, Downside Up Leadership, you'll get it in all the major bookstores and all of the major online channels. It's in paperback, it's in audio if you want to listen to me. It's in electronic format. And that'll kind of give that story that we've just mostly touched on today. It actually chronicles some of my worst experiences in 20 years of building the Back in Motion Health Group. And it's warts and all. I don't think I come off very good in that book, but fortunately it ends well. And like you say, our story's not over, so we have lots more to learn, but that's something that you'll find. Follow me in the socials. I think you'll just follow me on LinkedIn or Facebook, and you'll kind of see these themes repeating through life, love, family, and practice. And I do have a webpage, jasontsmith.com.au, and really everything springs off from there. So hopefully you can find what you need, and I'm very happy to talk to any of your listeners offline about their experience. I'd love to learn a little bit about their journey too.
Thank you. Look, we know how valuable your time is. We certainly appreciate it, and I'm thrilled to create a platform where multiple allied health practice owners can hear you speak. Where once upon a time it was, sort of industry driven towards physiotherapy. You've got a very, very powerful message, a really important story, and a journey worth listening to. So thank you very much for your time today and for joining us and for delivering all your words of wisdom, I'll call them.
I'm flattered for the invite. Thank you very much, Jade.
Pleasure.